What's up, folks? Welcome back to Tactical Tortoise. My name is Trevi, and while normally on this channel we talk about Warhammer 40,000, the tabletop game, today we're doing something a little bit different and talking about the video game 40k Darktide. Because today I'm going to be going over some tips and tricks for new players getting into Darktide. These are things that I wish I knew when I started playing the game and I complained about incessantly before somebody set me straight. So hopefully this video can spare you the trauma of those first early games. As always, if you like my content and you like my channel, go ahead and click like and subscribe. Do all the YouTube stuff. You know the drill. You've heard it a million times. A lot of this footage has come from my Twitch streams over at TacticalTortoisetv, and let's get into it. One of the first things that confused me about Darktide was the incomprehensibility of the weapon system. So let's break down weapons and item management a little bit. Firstly, the rarity of your weapon is broken down into two categories. The weapon rating, which is a numerical number, usually between 1 and 400, and then the color, or what is ostensibly the rarity of that weapon. The weapon rating is an amalgamation of the base weapon statistics, and weapons do come with randomized statistics, and a rating of all of the benefits it has. However, that color is just the level of the weapon based on the number of perks that it has. A gold-colored weapon has the maximum number of perks, going down to purple, which can take one more if you go to Hadron to get your weapon consecrated, down to blue, green, gray, and so on. This means that a weapon that is gold may not actually be more powerful than a weapon that has a higher rating. And generally speaking, you want to be valuing the weapons with a higher rating more than the weapons with a higher rarity. The reason for this is that you can increase that rarity later by spending your craftable resources, those being diamantine and plasteel, later on in the game when you go to entreat Hadron. Now, if you look down below this readout, you can see that the weapon rating is broken into two categories. The base rating, which takes into account only its base stats, and then the rating of all of its perks. Interestingly, this means that you should value more highly lower rarity weapons that have a higher base rating. This is because you can get those weapons more cheaply and then go and add perks on top of that at Hadron's terminal. So when you're looking to value your weapons and expecting to upgrade them and keep them for a while, look for weapons with a high base rating because those will typically have high base stats that the perks will then multiply with. When you're looking at weapons, another important thing to think about is your shop level. This is something I had no idea about when I first started playing and absolutely blindsided me. But if you see people going to the armory and purchasing weapons with a very high rating, whether that's base rating or total rating, including their perks, that is typically because their inventory has higher level items in it. When the armory refreshes and gives you a new set of items, those items are generated based on the highest rated item that you're currently carrying. Meaning that if you go to the armory and you see weapons that have a higher total rating than the highest rating in your current inventory, and you've got money to burn, which especially towards the end game you typically will, you should almost always buy that weapon, even if you don't have any expectation of using it. This increases what is essentially your shop level. That means you're going to get even higher rated items the next time around, or at least a higher chance to get them. And once you get higher rated items, you can sell those unused weapons to recoup a little bit of your money back. Towards the late game, you're going to be looking for ways to squeak a little bit of extra efficiency out of your weapons, and this is the way to do that. Last but certainly not least, make sure to try out all of the different weapon varieties in the armory. While it looks like there are some weapons that are basically identical and maybe have some stats different, a lot of them are actually different marks of weapon. You can see those with the MK and then the number next to them in the weapon's title, and they'll typically have different artwork. These weapons oftentimes have a different base stat and perform remarkably differently. Melee weapons will have different swings, whether up or down vertically or horizontally for more of a beheading motion, and ranged weapons will occasionally have different rates of fire, base damage values, or even special abilities. When you're trying to work out your favorite loadout, make sure to go try all these weapons and pick the one that works best with your playstyle. Next up, let's talk about something that's incredibly important to Darktide, that being sound. Arguably, sound in Darktide is more important than a lot of the visuals in the game, and paying attention to sounds around you is a good way to stay on your toes, especially during the higher difficulty missions. One thing you'll pick up very early in your playthroughs is that there are elite enemy spawn sound effects, where you'll hear things like mutants yelling, flamers ticking their igniter, or hounds howling in the distance when they spawn and start to charge at you. That, alongside the elite enemy voice lines that they'll constantly be spouting as they're running around the map, are good to keep in mind so you can be prepared for what you're going to find around the next corner.
I'll sell you down.
Importantly as well, sometimes these enemies will spawn behind you, and even normal enemies like poxwalkers or cultists will spawn behind you and can ruin your day if you don't notice that they're sitting there just beating on you the whole time. Now, speaking of enemies beating on you from behind, the game also has a backstrike sound effect. You'll hear a bit of a whooshing sound effect when an enemy goes to attack you from behind. And typically enemies have a pretty long wind-up between their attacks, so you have a couple seconds to turn around, block, push them, or dodge out of the way before that attack connects. Now, last but certainly not least is a slight audio cue that occurs when an enemy is about to shoot you with a ranged attack. You'll hear a little bit of a ping before they pull the trigger, and oftentimes you'll see a flash as well if they are sighting in on you, and that will give you the opportunity to dodge out of the way of that attack. A little tougher in arenas where there are tons of ranged enemies, but if you're just dealing with a couple, you can potentially get through the fight unscathed by paying attention to when those enemies are shooting you, taking cover, or dodging to throw off their aim. Now, speaking of dodging, one thing that I definitely did wrong when I'm first jumping into the game was approaching combat totally incorrectly. While watching combat from players often looks like they are wading into a horde of enemies and button mashing their way to victory, combat is actually an intricate dance and combination between attacking, blocking, pushing, and dodging. Well, I don't have any specific tips here, and I think a lot of it's just going to be muscle memory built up over time, but one thing that you should pay attention to is using all of those abilities effectively in conjunction with one another. As I said before, a lot of the basic enemies have a very long wind-up before their attacks connect with you, which gives you a little bit of an opportunity to retaliate in some way, whether attacking them to knock them off their balance, blocking, pushing them, or dodging out of the way. Especially with a higher damage weapon, this means that oftentimes managing your stamina and using those abilities in conjunction means you can actually jump through hordes and be relatively immune to counterattacks. One thing you'll see at higher levels of play is that players don't necessarily worry about hordes or large numbers of enemies because they're able to use their defensive abilities to get around the sides of the hordes, not take any damage, but still continue to attack when openings present themselves. I definitely went down a lot of times when I first started playing by just jumping in and trying to hit people with my axe. Definitely not the way you're supposed to do it. You're definitely supposed to be using all of those defensive abilities together in one dance. Now, before we wrap up the video, one thing I want to talk about are some of the most annoying special elite enemies in the game and dealing with them. Sometimes they feel entirely unfair, especially if you have just jumped into a game and immediately get trampled and destroyed by a bunch of enemies spawning on you, and it feels real bad. But let me tell you, there are counterplay to all of the most annoying enemies. Today, I'm going to be talking specifically about trappers, mutants, and poxhounds. These are the three types of enemies that can effectively stun lock you, and if without the intervention of your team, basically kill you from full as long as they pin you for long enough. Trappers attack by firing a net at you, and while the net has a pretty wide pulse radius and makes it very difficult to dodge, it is dodgeable. However, sometimes you're not able to get out of the way, you're pinned between enemies or a wall, and the trapper does get you. If this does happen to an ally, the res from the trap doesn't take very long. It completes in about 2 seconds, which is a far cry from the much longer period it takes to raise an ally that has been totally knocked out. This is short enough that you can often jump in to save a downed ally who has been netted and free them before other enemies come in and start to swing at you to reset that count. So when a trapper's attacking you, dodging out of the way at the last minute to stop that net from hitting you is your best defense if you can't stagger or otherwise neutralize the trapper. But if another ally gets hit, you can almost immediately free them as long as you can get over to them quickly. Mutants are dodgeable as well, but it's much tougher. You typically have to reserve 2 dodges in a row to get entirely out of the range that they'll grab you if they're charging directly at you. They have a very tight turning radius, so doing this as late as you can during their dodge, it gives you the best chance of getting out of the way, but if you do, oftentimes they'll be stunned by running their tiny little head directly into a wall, and that gives you a chance to fight back. If you have charged weapons like force swords or eviscerators, oftentimes you can one-shot them with a single charged attack, and then you don't have to worry about that mutant anymore. Poxhounds are the last one I'm going to talk about today. They are much tougher to dodge, being able to basically teleport to your location from a near radius. The animations are a little bit scuffed for those guys right now, but hopefully that changes in the future. Dodging them generally isn't the way to go, although sometimes it is effective. However, the tried and true method is to block and push as soon as the poxhound is charging at you. Once you see them leave the ground for their jump, a block and push will stun them and cause them to run away, giving you the chance to either regroup or kill them on their way out. If an ally gets surprised by one or isn't able to block it at the right time, they'll be downed and pinned under the hound while the hound slowly kills them. You can stop this obviously by killing the dog. However, if you have a weapon capable of staggering enemies, typically that will be enough to push the dog off and give the ally a chance to get back up and fight back. I typically play a Psyker, and a charged Void Strike Staff is usually enough to knock the dog off an ally, but I think a lot of other weapons like shotguns and grenade launchers are enough to do this as well. This is especially useful if you're farther away from them and can't quite get to them before they lose a ton of health. And with that, that's all my tips and tricks for new Darktide players. Hopefully you can make use of these in your subsequent games. And let me know down in the comments if you enjoy this style of Darktide content. Big thanks to everybody who watched all the way through the video. Big thanks as well to everybody who supports me, either over on Patreon at patreon.com/tacticaltortoise, YouTube channel members on this channel, or Twitch subscribers over on twitch.tv/tacticaltortoisetv. All you people are great. I love you. Remember to keep it classy, folks, and have happy video gaming, I guess.